I watched through half-closed eyes as my wife of 10 years rifled through my desk drawer, pulling out my father's watch, the one he'd given me on his deathbed. Jessica held it up to the light, examining it like a piece of merchandise before dropping it into a small velvet bag. She was humming. Actually humming while she pawned off the last memory I had of my old man. I'd been awake for 3 days now, but she had no idea. The doctors thought I was still in a coma. Better that way, I realized, as I watched the woman I'd loved destroy everything I held dear. My name is Mark Holloway, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I'm a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Portland, 34 years old, with what I believed was a solid marriage to my college sweetheart. Jessica and I met during our sophomore year at Oregon State. She was studying marketing, I was buried in computer science coursework, and somehow we just clicked. She was vivacious, outgoing, everything I wasn't. Where I was quiet and methodical, she was spontaneous and charming. We married right after graduation, bought a modest house in Southeast Portland, and settled into what I thought was domestic bliss. I worked long hours building security software, while Jessica climbed the corporate ladder at a digital marketing firm downtown. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams of starting a family someday. I trusted her completely, with my passwords, my bank accounts, my heart, everything. Jessica knew every detail of my life. She knew about my strained relationship with my sister Erica, how we'd barely spoken since our father's funeral 5 years ago over some stupid argument about his estate. She knew about my vintage guitar collection that I'd been building since high school, my pride and joy, worth nearly $40,000. She knew about my life insurance policy, my savings, my investment accounts. I'd made her the beneficiary of everything because that's what you do when you love someone unconditionally. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought we were solid. We went on weekend trips to the coast, hosted dinner parties for her co-workers, spent quiet evenings watching Netflix while I played guitar and she scrolled through social media. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I'd think about how lucky I was to have found my person so young. When her friends would complain about their husbands, Jessica would squeeze my hand and say, "I got one of the good ones." That's what made everything that followed so devastating. The foundation of trust we'd built over 10 years, the shared bank accounts, the joint credit cards, the way she had access to every aspect of my financial life. It all became a weapon she'd use against me while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. The signs were there long before my accident, but I was too trusting to see them. Jessica had been working late more frequently, coming home with stories about demanding clients and tight deadlines. She'd started going to happy hours with her marketing team, something she'd rarely done before. Her phone was always face down now, and she'd taken to showering immediately when she got home from work. There were the small disrespects that I brushed off at the time. She'd roll her eyes when I talked about upgrading my home studio setup. She started making jokes about my midlife crisis guitars in front of friends, little cutting remarks that made me feel foolish for having hobbies. When I'd suggest we spend Sunday afternoons together, she'd sigh and say she needed space to breathe. She'd begun questioning our financial decisions more aggressively. Why did I need so many guitars? Wasn't my vintage Les Paul just sitting there collecting dust? Why were we keeping so much money in savings when we could be living our lives? She pushed for expensive vacations, designer clothes, dinners at restaurants we couldn't really afford. When I'd express concern about our budget, she'd accuse me of being cheap or controlling. The month before my accident, she'd started talking about Alex from her office more frequently. Alex this, Alex that. How funny Alex was, how Alex understood marketing in a way that really impressed her. Alex had gotten a promotion. Alex had bought a new car. Alex thought she should ask for a raise. I should have paid attention to how her face lit up when she said his name. But the most telling sign was how she'd started talking about our future, or rather, how she'd stopped. No more discussions about kids, about renovating the house, about growing old together. When I'd bring up long-term plans, she'd get vague, change the subject, or suddenly remember something urgent she needed to do. It was like she was already mentally checked out of our marriage but hadn't bothered to tell me. The night before my accident, she'd been particularly cold. I'd made dinner, opened a nice bottle of wine, hoping we could reconnect. She barely touched her food, spent the entire meal on her phone, and went to bed early without saying goodnight. I remember lying there next to her, listening to her breathing, wondering when we'd become strangers sharing a bed. The breaking point came not during my accident, but 3 days after I'd regained consciousness. The doctors still thought I was in a coma. My vitals were stable, but I wasn't responding to stimuli. In reality, I was listening, watching, and learning things about my wife that shattered every illusion I'd held about our marriage. It was Tuesday afternoon when she brought Alex to my hospital room. They thought I was unconscious, so they spoke freely. Jessica was wearing a new dress, expensive, something I'd never seen before. Alex was tall, confident, the kind of guy who probably peaked in college and never got over it. They weren't there to check on my condition. "The doctors say he could wake up any time," Jessica was saying, her voice carrying none of the grief I'd expect from a devoted wife. "But honestly, even if he does, the brain damage could be severe. He might not even remember who I am." Alex laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Would that be such a bad thing?" "Fresh start for both of you." "Don't be cruel," Jessica replied, but she was smiling. "Though I have to admit, this whole situation has made me realize how much of my life I've been wasting. I'm 32, Alex. I should be traveling, having fun, not tied down to someone who thinks a wild Friday night is trying a new guitar tuning." That's when Alex kissed her. Right there, 3 feet from my supposed deathbed, he kissed my wife, and she kissed him back with a passion I hadn't seen from her in years. My heart monitor stayed steady. Years of meditation and controlled breathing from my anxiety management had taught me to regulate my physical responses. But inside, something fundamental broke. "I've already talked to the lawyer about the insurance," Jessica continued after they broke apart. "If he doesn't wake up in the next few weeks, I can start the process. The policy is for $500,000 plus his 401k plus the house. We could be in the Bahamas by Christmas." "And if he does wake up?" Alex asked. Jessica's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Then I file for divorce and take half of everything anyway. Either way, I'm done pretending to be the devoted wife. I've wasted enough years." That was my breaking point. Not the infidelity, not even the casual way she discussed my potential death like a business transaction. It was the word pretending. Our entire marriage, everything I'd believed was real, had been a performance for her. She'd been acting the part of a loving wife while planning her exit strategy, waiting for the right moment to cash in and move on. As I lay there, maintaining the facade of unconsciousness, a cold clarity settled over me. Jessica wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent my entire career thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems, building systems that couldn't be broken. It was time to apply those skills to something more personal. The old Mark would have confronted her, would have tried to save the marriage, would have given her the benefit of the doubt. But that Mark died in the car crash. The man lying in this hospital bed was someone new, someone who understood that trust, once broken, could never be repaired. Someone who knew that the only response to betrayal was complete and total victory. My plan began forming that very night, lying in the dark hospital room while Jessica went home to play grieving widow on social media. I had advantages she couldn't imagine. First, everyone thought I was unconscious, giving me perfect cover to observe and plan. Second, my sister Erica was a family law attorney, and despite our estrangement, she'd been listed as my emergency medical contact since my marriage, something I'd forgotten but Jessica never knew. Third, I'd built my career on understanding systems, security, and how to exploit weaknesses. The next morning, I waited until Jessica left for her emotional support coffee with Alex, then carefully opened my eyes and called for the nurse. I explained that I'd been conscious for days, but wanted to keep it secret. I needed to process things privately before dealing with the media attention my accident had generated. The medical staff was surprisingly accommodating, especially when I mentioned concerns about my wife's behavior. My first call was to Erica. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, but blood runs deeper than pride, and when I explained the situation, she was on a plane from Seattle within hours. Erica had always been the fighter in our family, sharp, relentless, and absolutely unforgiving when someone crossed people she cared about. I'd forgotten how formidable she could be until she walked into my hospital room with a briefcase and a look that could melt steel. "So," she said, settling into the visitor's chair, "your wife thinks you're dying. She's already spending the insurance money, and she's fucking her coworker in your bed. Did I miss anything?" I filled her in on everything I'd observed and overheard. Erica took notes with the precision of a seasoned attorney, asking pointed questions about assets, accounts, and Jessica's recent behavior. By the end of our conversation, she was smiling. Not a pleasant smile, but the predatory grin of a lawyer who'd just found her prey's weakness. "Here's what we're going to do," Erica explained. "First, I'm transferring you to a private rehabilitation facility where we can control the information flow. Jessica will think you're still unconscious. Second, we're going to document everything, every lie, every betrayal, every cent she steals. Third, we're going to systematically remove her access to all assets while building an airtight case for fraud, adultery, and attempted medical coercion." The smart home system I'd installed 2 years earlier became our secret weapon. Jessica had no idea that every camera, every microphone, every sensor was still synced to my phone and backed up to a cloud server she couldn't access. While she thought she was operating in secret, we were recording everything. Her conversations with Alex, her phone calls to insurance companies, her casual discussions about pulling my life support. Erica set up a war room in her Seattle office, coordinating with local attorneys and private investigators. We discovered that Jessica had already made preliminary inquiries about accelerating the insurance payout process. She'd contacted 3 different funeral homes for pre-planning purposes. She'd even researched which countries don't have extradition treaties with the United States, though she'd tried to clear her browser history afterward. The beauty of my plan was its patience. Jessica was moving fast, driven by greed and lust, making sloppy mistakes. I had time, resources, and most importantly, legal cover. Every action we took was documented, justified, and completely above board. By the time she realized what was happening, it would be far too late. We established a timeline, 2 months to gather evidence and secure assets, then a devastating reveal that would destroy her completely, not just financially, but socially, professionally, and emotionally. She wanted to play widow? I'd give her something to actually grieve about. The execution of my plan unfolded with surgical precision over the next 8 weeks. While Jessica posted daily updates on social media about her difficult journey as my caretaker, I was systematically dismantling her life from a private rehabilitation center across town. Week 1 was about intelligence gathering. The smart home cameras captured everything. Jessica bringing Alex over for dinner in our dining room, using our bed for their affair, going through my personal belongings like she was shopping at an estate sale. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every laugh about being too young to be a real widow. Every cruel joke about my boring hobbies. Every detailed discussion about their post-insurance payout plans. My favorite recording was from day 6, when Jessica and Alex were packing up my guitar collection. She held my 1959 Les Paul, worth $15,000 and irreplaceable, and said, "God, he was so obsessed with these things, like they're just guitars. At least now I can finally have a decent living room." Alex responded, "Don't worry, babe. After the insurance comes through, you can buy whatever furniture you want. Hell, you can buy a whole new house." Week 2, Erica began the asset protection phase. Since Jessica was my wife, she had legal access to our joint accounts, but she didn't know about several trusts and investment accounts that required both signatures for major withdrawals. More importantly, she had no idea that my recovery had triggered automatic asset protection protocols I'd built into our financial structure years earlier. Ironically, to protect us from potential lawsuits related to my software work. Erica systematically froze accounts, transferred assets to protected trusts, and documented every fraudulent claim Jessica made. When Jessica called my life insurance company claiming I was deteriorating rapidly and asking about expedited payouts, we recorded the calls. When she contacted our bank claiming financial hardship to access our emergency funds, we documented her lies about medical expenses she wasn't actually paying. The most damaging evidence came in week 3. Jessica had convinced herself that pressuring the doctors to remove my life support was her merciful duty as my wife. She scheduled meetings with hospital administrators, claiming I'd expressed wishes to not be kept alive artificially. She even brought forged documents, crude forgeries that Erica's handwriting expert immediately identified as fraudulent. But Jessica's masterpiece of stupidity came when she started planning my funeral. She booked the cheapest possible cremation service, selected a tiny memorial venue, and created a guest list that excluded most of my friends and all of my family. The funeral director, confused by her eagerness and strange requests, started asking questions. When Jessica insisted on scheduling the service as soon as possible after he passes, the director contacted the hospital's ethics board. Week 4 through 6 were about building the legal case. Erica had assembled a team that included forensic accountants, private investigators, and family law specialists. They discovered that Jessica's affair with Alex went back 8 months, long before my accident. Credit card records showed hotel visits, expensive dinners, gifts purchased with our joint account. Her search history revealed she'd been researching divorce settlements and life insurance policies for months. The private investigator uncovered the most damning evidence. Jessica had taken out additional life insurance on me just 6 weeks before my accident, doubling the payout to over $1 million. She'd forged my signature on the application and listed herself as the sole beneficiary. The insurance company's fraud investigation unit was very interested in this timeline. Week 7 was when we started the financial counterattack. Erica had quietly dissolved our joint accounts, transferring my assets to protected trusts that Jessica couldn't touch. When Jessica tried to make a large withdrawal to fund her Bahamas trip with Alex, she discovered the accounts were frozen. Her panicked calls to various banks were all recorded, each one revealing more about her fraudulent claims and her urgency to access money that was no longer hers. The final phase began in week 8, when Jessica, growing desperate, filed for divorce. She assumed that even if I recovered, she'd be entitled to half of our assets as my estranged wife. Her attorney, a bargain basement family lawyer who specialized in quick settlements, assured her that Oregon was a no-fault state and that infidelity wouldn't affect the property division. Jessica walked into that divorce hearing like she was attending a coronation. She wore a new black dress, purchased with my credit card, brought Alex for moral support, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. The local media had picked up the story. Local woman seeks divorce from comatose husband, and she seemed to enjoy the attention. What she didn't know was that I'd been discharged from rehabilitation 2 days earlier. What she didn't know was that Erica had coordinated with the district attorney's office to time multiple indictments with the divorce proceedings. What she didn't know was that every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest had been provided with copies of our evidence file. The courtroom was packed that Tuesday morning. Jessica had expected a routine divorce hearing, maybe some local media coverage about the unusual circumstances. Instead, she walked into a legal massacre that would destroy every aspect of her carefully constructed lie. She saw me first. I was sitting at the plaintiff's table, very much alive, very much conscious, and very much ready for war. Her face went white, then red, then white again. Alex, standing beside her, actually stumbled backward like he'd seen a ghost. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and the rapid clicking of camera phones. "Your Honor," Erica began, rising from her seat with predatory grace. "Before we address the divorce petition, I believe the court should be made aware of several criminal matters that directly pertain to these proceedings." What followed was a 90-minute presentation that systematically destroyed Jessica's life. Erica played audio recordings of Jessica and Alex discussing my anticipated death like a business opportunity. Video footage of them celebrating in our bedroom while I supposedly lay dying. Documentation of forged signatures, false insurance claims, and attempts to coerce medical professionals into ending my life support. The insurance fraud evidence was particularly damning. Jessica had not only forged documents but had made multiple false statements about my medical condition to accelerate payouts. The additional life insurance policy she'd taken out 6 weeks before my accident, with forged signatures, constituted wire fraud, a federal crime. But the piece de resistance was the recording from week 3, where Jessica told Alex, "Honestly, if he doesn't die soon, I might have to help things along. These medical bills are killing me, and I can't wait much longer." Even her bargain basement attorney looked physically ill when that played in open court. Jessica tried to speak, to defend herself, but Judge Morrison cut her off. "Mrs. Holloway, you are being charged with insurance fraud, medical coercion, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right." The property division was swift and brutal. Since Jessica had committed multiple felonies during our marriage, including attempts to defraud insurance companies and coerce medical professionals, she forfeited any claim to marital assets. The house, the cars, the investments, everything, legally mine. She left the courthouse with nothing but the clothes on her back and a date with a federal prosecutor. Alex's destruction was almost an afterthought. Erica had provided his employer with video evidence of him conducting his affair during work hours, using company resources to plan fraudulent activities. He was fired that afternoon. His wife, yes, Alex was married, something Jessica apparently didn't know, filed for divorce and took their kids to her mother's house in California. But the real devastation came from the media coverage. The story had everything: a miraculous recovery, a cheating wife, insurance fraud, attempted murder. The widow who couldn't wait became a national sensation within hours. Every humiliating detail, every cruel laugh, every callous discussion about my death was broadcast across social media platforms. Jessica's Instagram account, where she'd posted dozens of grieving widow photos, became a museum of lies. People screenshot every fake tear, every manipulative caption, every staged photo of her suffering through her loss. The internet is unforgiving, and Jessica became the target of a righteous fury that followed her everywhere. She couldn't get a job. Her face was too recognizable, her reputation too toxic. She couldn't rent an apartment. Landlords wouldn't touch her. She couldn't even show her face in public without someone recognizing her as that psycho wife who tried to kill her husband for insurance money. Alex's life imploded just as completely. His ex-wife's divorce attorney made sure everyone knew about his role in the conspiracy. He lost his house, his kids, his career, and any prospect of rebuilding his life. Last I heard, he was working at a call center in Phoenix, living in a studio apartment, and drinking himself to sleep every night. The criminal cases moved forward with ruthless efficiency. Federal prosecutors don't mess around with insurance fraud, especially when it involves conspiracy and attempted murder. Jessica's public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was too overwhelming, the media attention too intense, the prosecutors too eager for a high-profile conviction. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 12 years to think about how her greed and cruelty had cost her everything. 12 years to remember how she'd laughed about being too young to be a real widow while planning my death. 12 years to understand that some betrayals carry a price that can never be fully paid. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life with surgical precision. I moved to a new city, started my own security consulting firm, and bought a house with a proper music room for my guitar collection. The guitars Jessica had tried to sell were recovered during the asset investigation. I kept every one of them, not for their monetary value, but because they represented something she could never understand or destroy. Genuine passion, authentic joy, the ability to create something beautiful. I never remarried. Some scars run too deep, some trust once broken can never be repaired. But I found peace in my work, in my music, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served with mathematical precision. The story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that betrayal carries consequences, that greed ultimately destroys those who embrace it, and that sometimes the quietest revenge is the most devastating. Jessica had planned my funeral, but in the end, I buried her reputation, her freedom, and her future. She wanted me dead so she could start living. Instead, she destroyed her own life so completely that she became something worse than dead, forgotten, irrelevant, a cautionary tale that people shared and then moved on from. I survived, thrived, and never looked back. The widow who couldn't wait finally learned the value of patience, sitting in a federal prison cell with nothing but time to contemplate the magnitude of her mistakes. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.